Well, hello Internet, and welcome to part 36 of my Java video tutorial series. Today we're going to do something really cool. A lot of you guys have asked me numerous questions about JTables, and a whole bunch of other people asked me questions about how to pull information from a database into a JTable. Now understand, to properly set up this database, first off, you need to watch and set up the database using part 1 of my Sabermetrics tutorial. It is a link up above. Then once you're able to do that, let's say a Major League Baseball team came to you and said, I want you to go through and find the 200 best players and be able to calculate out for me the minimum cost per run for every single player. In this tutorial, you're going to learn how to create this whole entire thing here. It's all 100% sortable, and it's really neat, and all this information is pulled from a database. So let's get into the code. Alright, so first off, we put a whole bunch of different libraries in here you've seen before. This is for SQL. There's all kinds of information in regards to setting up the frames, since this is going to be a GUI app like you just saw. This default table cell renderer is going to allow me to very specifically render out information inside of each cell of the table that you just saw. And then default table model allows you to define exactly methods and so forth inside of your JTable. And then we can also make specific changes to columns and things like that. So here you see the same things you've always seen, lesson 36, and here's all that, and all the code is available underneath of this video. You should get it. It'll make it very easy for you to understand because it's heavily commented. All right, the first thing we need to do is create a multi-dimensional object array, and it's going to hold all of my column data for each player. So all that information that's assigned to each player. So I'm going to actually create that outside of main. And this tutorial is like perfect for a model view controller design pattern, but I actually designed it that way, and I found that it was so hard to follow. So what I'm going to do is have most of the information be in the method main. I know that is not the way to do it, but so that you can understand what I'm doing, that is the way that I'm going to do it, instead of breaking everything up into a bunch of different methods. So create a multi-dimensional array that's going to hold a bunch of objects, and I'm going to call this database info. Then I'm also going to need another one of these guys, but it doesn't have to be a multi-dimensional array because it is going to hold all of my column titles. And then how I assign all those, this is a great review for everything I've covered in the past. I'm going to say year, I'm going to say player ID, name, TTRC, which stands for theoretical team runs created, which is a sabermetric formula. And sabermetrics is used to analyze baseball players, if I didn't say that before. Salary, cost per run, which is going to be how much do we pay them in salary versus how many runs they create, and position. And then to close off this object, we're just going to put the little curly brace there and a semicolon. Now, let's create another one, and this is a result set, and a result set contains a table of data filled with all the results of a query. That's what it is. So it has all of your query results in it. That's all. And then we're going to also create a result set metadata type. It's meta, not meet, and I'm going to call it metadata. And what this guy does is it's going to contain information on the data returned from the query. So for example, the number of columns and a whole bunch of other different things. Now I'm going to come in here and go static, default, table, model, and this is going to allow me to very specifically edit my JTable. I'm just going to call it dtable, and I'm going to say new, and I'm going to copy this guy right here. Paste it in there, and I'm going to pass it database info, which is going to be all of the rows of information, just so you're 100% clear. It's going to be all of this information right here. That's what's in that multi-dimensional array. And then I'm also going to pass it columns, which is going to be the title for everything. Now what I want to do is I want to override a method inside of default table model. And a shortcut way to do that is to just do it this way. So we're just going to go public class get column class. I want to override this method, and what this method is passed is a column number, and what it does in exchange is passes back what type of data type that column is. Very important. So we're going to define a basic class. We're going to call it return value. Now what I need to do is whenever this column is passed, I need to verify that it is actually a column that exists. So I'm going to say column number needs to be greater than or equal to 0 because there is no such thing as a negative column number inside of a JTable. And I'm also going to go column. I want to make sure that it's less than. I'm going to say get column count, which is a method that's going to return the number of columns. And then if that is indeed true, I'm going to assign the value for the return value, which is going to return the class type for this column at 0 column. And if anything is not making sense, get the code. It's heavily commented. It'll explain every single line. Get class, and get class is going to return the value for my column. And the reason why we're doing this is so that in this guy right here, see how the salaries and all this all are right justified? Well, by default, if you don't do what I'm doing right here, which is overriding the method name get column class, it treats everything that you pull from the database as a string. Well, we don't want it to do that. That's the reason why we need to override it and say, hey, wait a minute, there aren't just strings here. There is also numeric data. And that is why we are going to override this. And that's what this guy's going to do. It's going to say, no, this is not a string. This is a double, for example, and treat it as such, which means right justify it. And whenever we need to sort this column, treat everything as doubles instead of strings. Then we're going to come down here and go else, which means they're looking for a column that doesn't exist. We're going to go return value is equal to object, and we're just going to say class, which is what it returns by default. And we're going to come down here and go return value, and that is all that we need to do for that guy. So put a semicolon right there. So that is how you override a method in a real neat way instead of going and totally extending it and doing all that other nonsense. Now we can get into the main function. Like I said before, I would never put all this into this one main function, but I'm doing it because I think it makes more sense whenever you see everything and we're not constantly jumping out to different functions. In the real world, it doesn't make as much sense, but in this tutorial, I think it does. So we're creating a JFrame, which is going to hold all of our different components. And we need to go frame, set, default, close, operation. And all this is going to do is make sure that our JFrame and the application itself is completely shut down whenever somebody says that they want to exit our program. So that's all that does. Then we're going to go connection, because we're going to connect to the database and pull all this information from the database, is equal to null. And then we have to wrap all this stuff in a try block and catch any exceptions that are being thrown. And we want to get a driver that's going to allow us to query the database. How you do that is go class for name, com, this is MySQL, JDBC, driver. And then we have to go with our connection. We need to call driver manager and get connection. And what driver manager is it's used to handle a set of JDBC drivers, which just allows you to handle and work with different drivers so you can connect to the database. And then get connection, what it's going to do for you is it's going to establish a connection with whichever database you tell it you want to connect to. So you're going to go JDBC, MySQL, and then in this situation, mine is localhost because it's on my computer. Layman 591, which is the name of the database that holds all my baseball data. MySQL. This is my user ID. And turtle dove is the password I'm going to use. And no, I don't use this password anywhere except in these tutorials. So now what we got to do, we have to create a statement object. And it's going to be used to execute an SQL query. And just go connection, create statement, and create statement returns a statement object. And then what we needed to do is actually create a string, and I'm going to call it select stuff. And this query was actually created in my sabermetrics tutorial. I'm going to actually jump over here and get it right now because I didn't want to type all this out. All this is basic SQL. So like I said, get the code if you want to be able to see how this works. I'm just going to paste that in there and make sure I put an equal sign. This is all just a big giant SQL query just like that. I'm not going to go through it because I went through it previously. So after you issue this query, you need to go rows. And this is going to be the result set. So like I said up here, see, result set right up here, rows. This is going to contain all of the information that comes back whenever I query the database. So I need to go SQL state, execute, query. List doesn't go there. And then I need to pass it select stuff, which is the query itself, which is right here. See, select stuff. And like I said before, rows being known as a result set contains a table of data that represents all of the results of the query that you issue. And one thing that's important is it cannot be changed, and you can only read one row of returned information at a time and only in one direction. You can't bounce around with this guy. Now in regards to the metadata, let's say that you wanted to retrieve different numbers and types and properties of these query results that are right here. Well, you would use that metadata tag that I talked about before. So let's just say, I'm not going to do this in this tutorial, but I just want to show you this real quick. If you don't get this, don't worry about it. All right, so let's say you wanted to go rows and get metadata, like that. What this is going to allow you to do now is, let's say you wanted to say number of columns, you wanted to get the number of total columns in the database. Well, you could just go metadata now and get column count, and that's exactly what that would return, is the number of columns. Of course, this would have to be an integer. And you could also get all of the different titles, like up here. Whenever I created the column titles, like the titles for all of the different columns in my JTable, well, if you wanted to actually pull those in yourself instead of defining them hard inside of this guy, you could also come in here and say columns is equal to new and create a string and then say num of columns, which is this guy, because we have to define how big our array is going to be. And then you could just go with a for loop. I is equal to 1. Well, I is less than or equal to num of columns. And then you could cycle through all those different results. Like, let's say you want to go columns. I is equal to, you could use the metadata again. Get column name, which is what we're trying to get. And then you could do whatever you would want with that information, store it in a database or whatever. So that's just a little bit of information, but like I said, I'm not going to get a whole lot into that. Let's just get rid of this then altogether. Now what I need to do is I am pulling in all of the row information dynamically. So what I have to do is create another object array, and I'm going to call it temp row. And then I'm going to use next to iterate through all the results of my query. So I ask my database, hey, I want this information, and it says fine. Here is row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, and so forth and so on, that contains the information that you asked for. Well, you can only get those rows of information one at a time, and you use it doing rows next, which just means give me the next row. And now what I'm going to do is, because I've laid everything in here differently, so for example, this is an integer, this is a string, this is a string, this is a double, this is a string, you get the point there. Well, I want all that information pulled out using its very specific data type. I don't want to pull everything out like everything's a string, which is the default. Well, I'm going to go temp row, and I'm going to go new object. And I'm going to go rows, get int, and I'm going to say what that in essence says is I want the very first column in the row of data, and I know it's an integer, so I want to get that integer. And then the very next thing is a string, so I'm going to say get string, and this is going to be column 2. Whenever you are creating anything inside of a JTable, the index always starts with 1 and not 0 like you might be used to. Then the very next thing that's going to get printed out here is also another string, so I got to change this to get string. And then this is going to be column 3 that I want. And then if I want to go on to the next row, I just want to make sure I have that comma there and then go down to the next row. And then in this situation, column 4, let's pull this over here so you can see it. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. What's this? This is doubles. So we want to go get double because we know we're going to be pulling a double in that situation. And then the next thing is a string again. And this is going to represent column 5, and then this is going to be column 6, and column 6 is an integer. And then the very next thing is going to be what? Column 7. And column 7, if we look at it again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is what? A double. We're going to say get double. And then column 8, I'm just going to put it right here on this line, is a string, so we're just going to call it string. And that is how we're pulling all that information together. There you are. That's how you define a object array, just like that. Now what do we need to do? Well, after we get all of this information inside of here, before we jump to the next row of information, we want to go D, table, model, and we're going to go add row, and we're going to add all of the results we got that are stored in temp row. We want to add that to our model, which is going to then be shot into our JTable. And of course, this is going to be DTable model, like that. So now that we got all that sorted, we need to catch all of our exceptions. So I'm going to go catch. One of the things we need to catch is SQL exception, EX. Here we are. And I'm just going to go system out, print line. And to keep this really simple, I'm going to go EX, get message, poink, like that. And then I'm going to bounce down here and catch another exception. I went over this in previous database tutorials. Let's say it's a class not found exception. And this is called if the driver can't be found, which is going to allow you to connect to the database. And those are the only exceptions that we need to worry about in that situation. Well, now we need to create the star of the show, which is the JTable. You just go JTable, and I'm going to call it table is equal to new JTable. And I go D table, model. Going to pass in its own specific type of model of a table, which does what? If you missed it, it just comes in here and makes sure that whenever class values are passed from the database over into our table, that we check to see what data type they are. But it allows us to do all kinds of sorting and other neat things. Now let's say you wanted to change the font for your columns in your table or for the cells in your table. Real simple, you just go table, set, row, height, and then table, get, row, height, which is its current height. And then on this situation, I'm just going to say I want to add 10 pixels to it. So there you are. That's a simple way to change the height of it. Let's say that you wanted to change the cell font. Just go table, set, font, and I'm just going to go new, font, and I'm going to say serif, and I'm going to go font plain. You could also go font bold, and let's say I want it to be 20 points. And there you are. That's how you do that. Real simple. I see these really complicated ways of changing fonts online. It's like, it doesn't have to be that complicated. Let's say that you wanted the person to be able to sort through your information in your table. It's real simple. Just automatically just go set auto create row sorter and set that to true. And that will automatically set up the table and allow people to sort through the information, which is awesome. Also, let's say that you'd want to come in here and resize the column widths. How do you do that? Well, the very first thing you need to do is go table, set, auto, resize, mode, which means it's going to automatically resize all of your columns to the way that Java thinks looks best, which is sometimes good and sometimes not. So you're going to have to shut that off first off, otherwise it won't allow you to manually go in and define the size of your columns or the width. And then if you want to actually set that width, you go table column, and I'm going to go column 1. If I want to change just the width for column 1, then I go table, get column, model, like that, and then I go get column. This is how you're able to select column 0. So if you ever wanted to actually get column 0, that is how you would do it. And then we're going to come in here and actually change the width on column 0, and I'm going to say set preferred width, and let's say I want it to be 100 pixels. Well, there you are, 100 pixels, and that's how you would set all those different column widths up. And if you want to change any of the other different columns, it's easy enough to do. Let's say that I want to change column 2. In this situation, I'm going to go call this 1, and then change this to 2, and let's say you wanted it to be 190 pixels. Well, there you are, you just changed that. You can do this all for all these other different columns. As far as I know, there's no way to set a default for a bunch of different columns all at one time. I don't think you can do that. If somebody out there figures out how to do it, please tell me, because it would be neat. Now, let's say you wanted to also justify, to the center all of the information contained in a column. Well, if you want to do that, you go table column, and I'm just going to call this TC is equal to table. I'm going to say get column that is named, that has the title, team. There's another way to get access to column information by the actual title for the column. And then if I want to center it, I go center, table, cell, renderer. I'm going to call this center, renderer is equal to new. And I'm just going to copy this like that. And then I go TC, set, cell, renderer. And I'm going to say center, renderer. I like that. Now let's say that I want to center a couple of these different guys. I'm actually going to show you this method is stored outside of main. So I'm going to center not only team, but I also want to center position. So I'm just going to go POS, which is the title for it. And then in this situation, I don't need that, so get rid of that. And I also don't need this. So I'm going to reuse those methods because it's simple to do that. And let's just leave it at that. You could also do right centered and all this other stuff. I go over that on the article for this guy. All right, so now I'm going to go J scroll scroll pane is equal to new J scroll pane, and I'm going to take my table and I'm going to assign it to this guy so that users of it will be able to scroll through the data that is in the table. I'm going to go frame add pane, and I'm going to use border layout center, and I went over all this stuff in my Java Swing tutorial, which is part of this tutorial series. Then I'm going to set my frame, set size 800 by 500. All stuff you've seen a whole bunch of times. I'm going to go frame dot set visible to true so that the frame shows up on the screen. And that is pretty much all I need to do with that. Now, outside of this class, Java Lesson 36, I need to create the method that is going to handle all this centering that's right here. And what is this called? It is called center table cell renderer, just like that. And this is a class that's going to be stored inside of here. So center table cell renderer, and I'm going to put in extends default table cell renderer. So I just need to extend that guy. And then inside of it, I'm going to go public Center table cell renderer is going to receive nothing, and what it's going to do is set horizontal alignment. And I just need to go J, label, center. And that's going to have center whatever I tell it, whatever column I want centered. And then, like I said, whenever you execute all this stuff, you have to wait for a while because this is an insane amount of information you're pulling out here. But like I said before, this table is going to show up and you're going to be able to sort through all of this different information. And it's really kind of cool. Leave any questions or comments below. Otherwise, till next time.